All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today on behalf of PAC, the Palestinian American Community Center. I just want to thank you for being part of this important discussion. I'm going to go ahead and introduce what we're going to be talking about tonight, and then take it away with the speaker. And then please feel free to leave any questions or comments at any point on the chat, whether you're on Facebook or on YouTube, and we will be able to get to them all towards the end. But I'm just going to go ahead and get started. So today we are focusing on and hosting part 2 of our 3-part series to increase education and awareness about drug abuse and drug addiction. As we at PAC always like to do, we like to ask the community what they are being affected by and what they would like to hear about the most. And this has been something that has been coming up over and over again, is addressing and talking about the drug abuse and addiction in our community. And so we're excited to have part 2. Part 2 today will focus specifically on dispelling the myths about drug addiction, including who gets addicted, why they get addicted, and how we as a community can support each other and make each other feel comfortable enough to come ask for help if you need it, and then also know what to do if someone does come to you for help, how to address them and talk to them in a way that doesn't push them away, but actually gives them the support that they need. So we are very excited to have a speaker here to kind of run us through this. I do just want to, as I mentioned, we have a community needs survey actually, where from reading that we knew that this was something that the community wanted to focus on. So I do just want to, I'm putting the link up here on the banner. I do just want to ask everyone to take a moment and fill out our community needs survey so that we can constantly know all of these issues that you would like us to discuss, and we can make sure we're supporting the community. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker for tonight. Stephen Kavalkovich is a former New Jersey paramedic and 911 rescue worker. He has dedicated his life to educating the community at large on the subject of drug addiction, recovery, and wellness. He is a respected podcast host and opioid education content expert at the University of Pennsylvania Nursing Program, and he also works as a Peer Health Navigator with Rutgers University Behavioral Healthcare Intensive Recovery Treatment Support Program, Early Prison Release. That is a long name, but clearly more than qualified to run us through this. Thank you so much for taking the time, and I'm going to hand it off to you.
Thank you so much. Excuse me. That's quite a mouthful. Thank you. I appreciate it. First of all, the first thing I'd like to say is first thing that comes to mind when it came to speaking to share my experience with this with you all tonight. The first thing that comes to mind is out of the shadows. First of all, that this was like a requested event, and there was about 3 years ago that I had met with a local person in my community who attended a mosque actually right around this corner from where I live in South Jersey, and I'd met her. I'd met the leadership at that mosque, and we had talked about doing something like this. It just wasn't the time. This was like 2.5-3 years ago or so, but I think the year that we've faced this year so far during COVID has certainly forced everybody to sit with themselves. I know it's done that for me. I mean, this room I'm sitting in right now, this is where I sit a lot, partially because I work from home now due to COVID, but also because, obviously we were, almost a year ago at this point, we were all, forced to kind of be home for a while, and it forced everybody to sit with themselves. And so it certainly increased the situation that, that I'm called here to speak about, which is, substance abuse, drug abuse, addiction, whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of words for it. I'm going to try to dispel some myths. Credibility-wise, I know it was mentioned before. Yeah, I was a paramedic in New Jersey for about 13 to 15 years or so, all told. I was at 9/11. I was at Ground Zero at the World Trade Center on 9/11 after the towers went down. And during those years of working as a paramedic, I was certainly educated. I certainly knew better because it was my job. Like, I was certainly educated. I worked in urban environments all over the state of New Jersey, Trenton, Atlantic City for most of my career. And I treated a lot of overdoses, and I always like kind of looked down on those folks and thought it was a black and white thing. Those people are those people, and I'm me. It would never happen to me until August of 2016. So we're going back 4.5 years that I wound up on my parents' living room floor in Marlton, New Jersey, dead of a heroin overdose. And the paramedics that came to revive me were former coworkers that I used to work with when I was a paramedic. But I had lost my certification about 2 or 3 years prior to that due to my substance abuse and addiction. So all those "it'll never happen to me" things and my "I know better because I'm educated and I see it all the time," all those things that I thought were complete, my world was shattered when I almost died, because it wasn't about knowing better. If it was about knowing better, or, I use this cliche all the time, but if it was about knowing better and Nancy Reagan was right and Just Say No worked and the war on drugs completely worked, we wouldn't be talking about this tonight. But clearly it hasn't worked. It's because it's not a black and white thing. So, so 4.5 years ago, that was my story. I'd lost, my paramedic certification. Fortunately, I was allowed to surrender it as opposed to having it revoked, because I had been in and out of drug treatment centers while working as a paramedic for healthcare systems that were they were doing their best to try to help an employee that was struggling, but at the same time, like, there came a point where I just couldn't. I wasn't able to do that work anymore due to how bad it got. So I surrendered my certification. But along with that, we'll get to that in a moment. I'm sorry. I got a little distracted thinking about that, because it's very personal to me, obviously. But I lost my certification. I lost my career. I lost my first marriage. I was married to a wonderful woman. She left me. I lost access to my kids on a regular basis. Pretty much lost everything, and it all just went downhill. And I never thought it would get there. And it started with trauma. Started with trauma from working in my career. It started with trauma for working as a paramedic for years. Started with stuff from childhood. At 13 years old, a youth pastor from a Christian organization tried to molest me. And when I came forward about it, nobody believed me, because that organization wanted to protect their reputation. And they still exist, and I'm not downing them or anything, or or that faith community in any way. But I've dealt with that over the years, of course. But all those things are contributing factors as to why things happen. It's not as simple as, "Oh, just say no. Don't do that because we said so." I know sometimes that is, it can be a very hard line in the sand, especially within your community. And I understand that, and I completely respect that belief system, of course. I guess I'm just here to say that, like, there's a human element to this. Like, when people, one of the myths that I'd like to kind of dispel is the idea, that it won't happen to me, it won't happen in my family, it won't happen in my community because of this, or because we believe this, or because we followed what our parents told us, et cetera, whatever it is. That's a myth that people believe. I live in a nice suburban South Jersey community, pretty, middle class, I guess you would say. And a couple of years ago, I wrote an article for a blog. I was writing different blog articles on addiction. This is back like 5-6 years ago or so. And I posted it, and it was about how there was a lot of kids, a lot of students, a lot of high school students from the local area that were dying from drug overdoses at 15, 16, 17 years old. And nobody wanted to talk about it. It was just brushed under the rug by the school systems, by the local communities. They just, they didn't want to talk about what was happening. And so I wrote this article, and it was taken off of off these local pages because they just didn't want to talk about it, because they didn't want to believe it was happening. But guess what? I sat down with the former police chief of Camden, New Jersey, and the prosecutor of Burlington County, and a bunch of people at a local restaurant for a magazine, South Jersey Magazine, a few years ago. And this was a statistic 2 years ago. They said that at that point, 78% of the overdoses that happened in Camden were not from people that were residents of Camden, but they were from local communities like Marlton, Medford, Cherry Hill, Mount Laurel, all these areas where these kids were dying from, but they didn't want to talk about it in the community. The thing is, it's a human thing. So when people say, "Does it not happen in it's not going to happen here?" Well, I would say, are there humans in your community? Because you can bet it's happening. I can promise you it's happening there. And there's a reason why this subject people want to talk about it now, because it's a real issue. It goes beyond, doctrine. It goes beyond rules and regulations, or, what parents tell us to do. And that's the thing, seeking help. See, the other issue with this is when someone is looking at someone who's, let's say, addicted to drugs, and addiction goes far beyond a substance. It's not about the substance anyways. The substance is just what works for that person, but everybody can be addicted to anything at any given point of the day. It's not about the substance. But when it comes to addiction, the core, you have to look at the core. We have to stop asking why the addiction, and we have to start asking why the pain. For me, it started with physics, underlying traumas, like I said before. Then I got physical injuries working as an emergency services worker. Got a couple of injuries, wound up getting painkillers. And yeah, it did something for the physical pain, but it did some wonderful, wonderful things for the emotional pain that I was carrying around. It just numbed me out. And before I knew it, I was hooked. And I'm working in a field where I can't talk about it because you got to be strong, you got to be tough, you can't let your feelings get to you, you can't talk about the struggles you're going through with anybody. And I suffered, and it got worse, and it worse and worse and worse until I was physically and dependent on painkillers to get through the day, because our bodies get hooked on, physically dependent on them very quickly. So you need it, and you need more and more and more of it. And eventually, once I lost my career, I couldn't afford to get them anymore, even buying them on the street. And I certainly, when they're going for $20, $30, $40, $50 a pill, and and the idea of heroin came only because I couldn't afford anything else. It was only like what the cost was. It was a financial decision. That's what I'm trying to say. Heroin was a financial decision, and for most people, it is. And the thing is, young people today, they're not starting with pot. They're not starting with pills because they're more difficult to get and more expensive to get. They're starting with heroin very young. But I want to go back to something. We have to ask why the pain, right? Because it's put up on the screen there, right? We have to stop asking why the addiction and start asking why the pain. That's the question we have to start asking. And the thing is, you come into a crossroads, because I could tell you that the core of anybody who's doing a behavior, and I'm sure I don't have to tell you all this, the core thing that most people are dealing with when they're doing a behavior, especially one that they don't want somebody to know about, or they're not proud of, or it might be harming them, somebody else. The core of that is shame. So let's play that out. Let's say somebody, the core emotion, the core of that is shame. And what do we do when we feel shame? It's a vicious cycle, because then that thing that's causing us more shame, it's actually causing us this, we'll keep doing more and more because we get some kind of pleasure out of it at the same time. It's like a weird paradox. But shame is the core of it. So let's play it out, like I was saying. Let's say we have a young person, let's say he's 15, 16 years old, and their behavior starts changing. These are things you should start looking for. Their behavior changes. Their personality starts to change. They start to isolate. They start to hide in their room. They start to just change their behaviors. Grades go down. They stop hanging out with the same people. They start hanging out with different people. They start, they're wearing long sleeves in the summertime. That's a real, that could be a real danger. That could be a sign, a sign that something could be going on. Like when I say that, I mean needle marks. I mean, let's get real. Let's talk about the reality of this, okay? So let's say you're a 15-year-old kid. His grades start slipping majorly, and you find out that he's using let's say any kind of drug. Let's say he's drinking alcohol, on the weekends, and it's starting to get out of hand or something like that. And you say, you're a failure, you're not a good son, you're not living up to our expectations, et cetera, whatever we say. And we're not doing it because we're intentionally trying to hurt that person. But in that moment, it's how we respond to them. It's how we deliver what we want to say to them in that moment, because they're caught. You ever been caught? I'm sure everybody that's listening has been caught, right? We've all been caught. What happens when we get caught, and then somebody points it out. And then they point out, we get defensive, right? That's what happens, right, guys? Come on. It happens to all of us. Whether we're like, the most pious, like following every rule that we can or not. It doesn't matter. Like, we all feel that when we're doing that one thing we shouldn't do, So if we then, so that we catch them and then we shame them, and when I say shame them, we tell them they're no good. Here's an example. When my ex-wife, my first mother-in-law, when they caught me doing drugs at their house, not that I'm proud of this, but when they caught me doing drugs at their house and they kicked me out of their house at like 11 o'clock at night, I was in a very, very volatile place emotionally, obviously, because I got caught. And they told me to pack my stuff and basically leave my wife. And I never lived with from that point on, me and my wife were never together again from that point on. And that, it was a shock, right? I was hit with trauma in that moment, regardless of what I was doing. And I'm not trying to discount what I was doing to create what happened, but let's just play it out, right? I was experiencing trauma in that moment. And her mother, who was very verbally, she had a very sharp tongue, was angry, and she was rightfully angry. I disrespected her home and her family, and she was 100% right. In that moment, she basically told me, I don't care if you go drive out of here and kill yourself. Like, that's how she, in that moment. And you know what? I almost went and did that, because that's, it just made it worse. So, I'm saying, shaming somebody for something that the core of what they're doing is shame is not helping anything but just increase the problem and make it worse, if that makes sense. That's, I guess, what I'm trying to say. So I guess when it comes to asking for help or seeking help, especially within a community where it's a difficult thing to talk about, we have to remember the core of who we are as people and our love of our families and our community, especially now more than ever. I really believe that. I think now is a period specifically more and more of community, and people are isolated in every way. I mean, my kids are doing, the hybrid schooling or the online schooling, and then my wife is upstairs every day teaching public school, to special ed students, online, and they're having to adapt to that. The world is changing, and as parents, I'll be 40 now in a couple weeks, and as parents, I don't know how to navigate my kids through what's going on in the world today, because none of us really know, really. I mean, nothing's certain. Nothing. If anything, I've learned one of the biggest lessons I've learned in this year is impermanence. And that being said, relationship, connection, and community is all that much more important, because impermanence has been highlighted so much, if that makes sense. Sorry, I just have some notes, and I'll be honest, my handwriting is pretty atrocious. So let's talk about some signs. So let's, and this could be an adult or child. It doesn't matter. We talked about it before a little bit, but these are kind of more obvious, I guess. But spending money, money missing from, a wallet, or, certain items missing from the home, or you notice somebody starts calling out of work, just changes in behavior. It's interesting. I mean, I was struggling, like I said, from 2008 until 2016. So for quite a long time, 8 years that I was in, in a really bad place and only increasingly getting worse. But you become in a place where even my family will tell you that they thought at a point that I became like a sociopath because my behavior changed so much. I became so selfish and so self-centered and just doing all these things that were harming myself and harming others. But it wasn't because I wanted to harm myself or others. We develop these mechanisms. We all develop them as human beings, coping mechanisms. I don't care who you are. We all have something. And I'm not saying anybody specific, pointing at you personally, but maybe everybody should take a moment to really look at themselves. What do you have going on? Like, what is it? Porn? Is it food? Is it sex? Is it, is it spending money? Is it working? Is it working too much? Is it hoarding too much stuff? Are we holding on to all these things? We think, when we think about drug abuse and addiction, we think about it because it's about drugs. But like I said, like this, we think that's the problem, but that's the solution. That's the person's solution. Whatever, we all find our solution to get through the day. And sometimes, of course, there's healthy solutions, of course. I'm not discounting that, but but sometimes they become unhealthy solutions, and having a safe place to talk about it, or having a safe somebody to talk about it with, or a group, or a virtual group, because that's obviously becoming more of a thing these days. Anything like that is so very important, because community is the thing. I was actually reading recently about a tribe. I think they're in Africa, perhaps. I'm not quite sure. But when they catch, like when somebody gets caught doing something wrong, whatever it may be, they take that person to like the middle, like the center of the village, and they put them in the center, and they all encircle the person, and they all point to them, and they tell them good things about the person, positive things, until that person starts to believe them, because that's the core of what I'm trying to talk about. I hope that kind of illustrates my point about the shame. That's what I'm talking about when it comes to shame. I actually see a question coming up, and I'm enjoying this little chat thing, so I'm gonna jump on here. So we have, what would be the most effective way for concerned people to get involved in helping victims? When you say, I guess the question would be victims, like victims of that are currently addicted. Well, I think it's having a safe conversation, coming to them in a loving way, having also interventions as well. I think is a huge thing, because sometimes the things that we think we're doing to help are not helpful. Like, we don't realize it because we don't know what we don't know. So that's why having someone like someone who is an expert in these topics to intervene, like, let's just say, for an example, and I hope this is what you're asking. Let's say somebody is struggling, with addiction in our family, and we don't know what to do, and they're not listening to us because we're just angry and fighting with them all the time. So that's where you get an interventionist. Sometimes can be very helpful in that case, to kind of assess and come as somebody who's a peer, like I'm somebody who's been there, right? So I could speak the language. I know what they're going through. You don't, and in their mind, they're not going to listen to you because you don't have anything to say, because you don't know you haven't walked in their shoes, and that's the thing. Like, that's why peer support services is becoming this is the wave of helping people. Honestly, it's like peer support services. That's the work I do in my day job, but it's also what I do, as far as interventions. It's what I do. Now, this is just me personally, but I'm not just touting me personally to do these things, but you get people that kind of know this stuff, to kind of navigate somebody through it. And if somebody is looking for services, like God forbid, like say somebody needs detox or and then when I say detox, now let me bring it all the way down. So if somebody is struggling with alcohol as a substance on a pretty regular basis, benzodiazepines, which are drugs like Valium, Xanax, Ativan, Klonopin, those kind of drugs, they need detox if they're going to stop using them. Like they can't abruptly stop using them if they've been using them a lot and long term, because abruptly stopping them can be very deadly. You can have seizures that could be very deadly from those types of substances, alcohol and benzo specifically. Opiates, I'm talking about heroin, I'm talking about fentanyl, I'm talking about carfentanil, I'm talking about pills, Vicodin, Tramadol, oxycodone, roxicodone, Oxycontin, Percocet, all of those pills, all of those things. When somebody has been using them long term, when they stop, they'll get very sick. More than generally won't die from it, but you'll feel like it. I mean, it's the withdrawal period can be very bad, and that's why sometimes it's hard for somebody to stay off of it if they want to stop, because the sickness gets so bad, the physical symptoms get so bad that the only way to stop them is either to go through the detox, where if you go to a medical detox, they can give you stuff that will help with the symptoms, or you go cold turkey and stop, but which can be very rough. But so there's detox, there's detoxes, there's places for people with no insurance. There's also 12-step fellowship. There's Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous. There's a lot of available resources for people. But I would say if somebody needs immediate help, one of the biggest resources I'm going to recommend to everybody, and maybe it could be written in the chat or something, is ReachNJ. And I'm going to give the phone number. I'm actually going to look it up here on my phone because I meant to have it up, but I forgot it. I apologize. So the number is 844-276-2777, and it's 24 hours a day, and it's funded by the state of New Jersey. And basically, if somebody is in need of some kind of substance abuse treatment or an assessment for treatment, they would call that number 24 hours a day and ask for that. And if they don't have insurance or if they have Medicaid, they can do an assessment over the phone, see what they need, and try to match them up with a treatment facility within the state that is taken either by their Medicaid or county or state funding. And if somebody has private health insurance, the recommendation I would give would be to call their health insurance company is the first thing right away. But if those are kind of things as far as helping people. Hopefully that answered your question. I think it did, maybe. So, but I guess bottom line is the biggest thing I want people to really take away and understand from everything that I'm trying to talk about here is that this is a human issue, and it's not really a black and white issue, and neither is recovery, right? A lot of times people hear addiction and they hear rehab. Sometimes that is proper. Sometimes that's proper treatment. Sometimes that's necessary. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes there's medications. There's Suboxone. There's methadone. There's a term used called harm reduction because listen, a dead person can't recover. So the whole concept is to meet somebody where they are, not where we want them to be. We have to meet them where they are and try to help them from their point of view, not ours. That's where a lot of the work I do comes in. It's meeting them where they are and trying to help them and formulate a plan for a life that they want, what they want their life to look like, instead of for instance, to give you an example, I went to multiple different treatment centers from New Jersey to Florida over 8 years. And not one of those treatment episodes did anybody ever ask me what I wanted or who I was. All they did was told me that I was this drug addict and I needed to jump through all these hoops and my life would get better. And I found that not to be true. Identifying myself personally as a drug addict only made my problem worse because I was handcuffing myself to a diagnosis, essentially. And I was so much more than that. I was I was a father. I was, all these things, but I was whittled down to a diagnostic code on an insurance form, and that didn't work for me. One of the biggest things that did help me, especially because I was a hardcore opiate addict. I was arrested, been in jail. I mean, I've been through it, and all of it, were things, all those I nevers happened. But I was on opiates for a long time, and one of the things that helped me was Suboxone, buprenorphine. It's a medication that's used to taper people off. It's used to basically, so when somebody takes opiates for a long time, their brain creates receptors the average brain doesn't have. A lot more of them. The average brain has the opiate receptors, but somebody who uses them long term creates a lot more. And when you stop using them, those things still want to be filled. So for me, they had to continue to be filled. Suboxone was a medication that's come along that partially fills them just enough to kind of calm them down, to relax them. So I'm not only focused on filling them all day. Now I could focus on where I'm going to live, where I'm going to get a job, what I'm going to eat, how I'm going to get my kids back, where I'm going to get my driver's license, where I'm going to clear my criminal record. All those things that I got to deal with were things that were not on my plan growing up. My plan when I was 16, went to EMT school, and then I went to paramedic school, was to do that and, stay married to my first wife and live in my first house and stay with my kids, and none of that stuff happened. But I'm here to say that because some people believed in me, because of Suboxone, because of medication, because of all those things, I was able to get the life that you couldn't believe. Like, I have a wonderful career. I travel around speaking on these subjects, and I'm very, very proud to do. I'm a father still. I get my kids every day. I just got remarried last year. I have a beautiful life, and it's all because I had the opportunity to do that. And a lot of that had to do with support, had to do with community support, had to do with stepping out of the shadows and addressing the issue that, that most people just don't want to talk about. So I see you're back, so I think we're going to go on to questions or something.
Yes, thank you for sharing all that you did. I hopped back on just because I see 3 questions that we just got from Facebook, so I can read them out to you one by one, and then we can just go that way, and you can address them. So the first comment or question is, don't you think the law should change for rehab centers to not allow drug addicts from leaving on their own, and not just have the right to go back to the street to die? So that's
Yeah, I think it's a tough one, because the issue is it's tough, because when you're dealing with somebody at a certain point, especially when they're not in a detox phase, when they're not in that beginning phase, where they're where they could be considered not able to make conscious decisions on their healthy decisions. However, like, you're right, it's a really tough one. So I think the law should. I'm not a lawyer, so I can't really speak on that, but I do think that there should definitely be some conversation regarding that, because I have worked at multiple for-profit treatment centers, and I have seen multiple people check out and leave. Now, we also have to accept the fact that people are responsible for their choices, but if somebody is like, not in a rational thinking state, like, it's tough to quantify that. So it's really, I get the question, and but I agree. I agree. A conversation needs to be had at some legislative level, and I would love to be a part of it, but I'm sure I won't get invited.
We hope you do. The next request is, could you talk about the perception that those who are not personally impacted by drug abuse ostensibly think that they are immune from the problem?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I say, because a lot of people that are kind of that attitude are like, well, just stop doing it. Like, it's a choice. You chose that. Well, okay. My counter to that is this. If somebody who has a heart attack, this is their 3rd one now, comes to the hospital for their 3rd heart attack, does the hospital and the cardiologist and and everybody say, no, we're not going to treat you because you didn't follow the prescribed diet and exercise regimen and medication regimen we gave you after the 2nd heart attack? So we're not going to treat you because you chose this. Because it's all about a choice, really. Everything is a choice. Like, I think it's kind of ludicrous for us to whittle it down to, oh, you chose that. Well, I mean, we choose everything, really. So it's 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 trying to help people understand that, like, or like another one would be like diabetic, like, and I hate to use cancer as an example because a lot of times cancer just happens, but sometimes it's from choices. But heart disease to me is a better one, and or adult onset diabetes a lot of times is due to lifestyle choices, right? Do we say, oh no, we're not going to treat you anymore because you chose that? No, we treat them, and we don't identify them as these things, as these people, as these scourge of society. They're just people, and it can happen literally to anybody. Like, it wasn't. I listen. I grew up in a house with parents to this day that I've never seen fight. Thank God they're still alive. They live in Florida, but I've never seen them fight. Never seen them do drugs. Never seen them drink alcohol. Never seen them smoke cigarettes. Never seen any of that. Meanwhile, I wound up shooting dope on in Kensington, in Philadelphia, or in Camden, in a Dunkin' Donuts bathroom. What happened? Was it their bad? Were they bad parents? No. Like, it's not as simple as we make it out to be. When I speak to the nurses, the nursing students, excuse me, at the Penn Nursing School, I get them like the last semester, and I do a full day on this subject. I say, I want you guys to remember when somebody rolls into the ER and it's like their 10th overdose. Remember, you don't know what got them here. All you see is what's in front of you. You don't see the journey that got them here. And if we started to look at people and remember that every single person's journey got them to where they are in front of you, regardless of where they are, I think we'd have a better world, because people would start to have a little bit more empathy and understand, like, it's not my place to judge why this dude's doing this, but like, me pointing my finger at him or picking on him isn't going to stop him from doing it. Like, maybe I change the narrative a little bit. I don't know. It seems like a pretty good idea to me.
Yeah, no, definitely. And actually, since we started talking about parents, I'm going to jump to the question about parents and then go back to the one before it. But
Yeah.
while we're on it, how should parents deal with this, and how can we as a community fight this to save our kids and our generation to come? I think that's kind of the biggest questions is how do we do it in a way that doesn't make people feel bad for it, but actually does help them?
It's really coming, it's having those conversations in love, like, about, like, it's not making it a taboo thing. It's not making it a demonized thing. That's what you do. Like, and I don't know how that's done in a, like, I don't think there's like one like answer to that. I think that's a cultural thing, and I think it's almost like to me, it's almost like a think tank or a board of directors has to or a group of people, not board of directors. That sounds so official, but like a group of people to get together to like change that culture, that it's not a demonized subject, and like permeating that from the leadership of a community all the way down. Like, and I don't know, like, I know that's such a vague answer, but it's got to that's the best way I can answer it, I think.
Yeah, no, and that's kind of what we're trying to do through, our center and having these educational workshops too, is to start that conversation. So I guess on the conversation of community, the question before that was, is it possible to overcome addiction with willpower and good advice alone without expert intervention? How much time does it take for a person to fully recover?
Well, see, that's the thing, because recovery is an individualized definition, because in order for somebody to identify that they are in recovery, they have to have some ownership that they have something to recover from, right? So it's a very personal decision. So it's I don't think it's as simple, like, for somebody to recover. It's like it depends. It depends on what their goals are. That's why I believe in such a person-centered thing. What are their goals? Like, I had a guy that I was working with who was doing cocaine. He was also taking Percocet sometimes. He called me because he was having problems with the cocaine. He told me about the Percocet, but he made sure to tell me I didn't identify the Percocet as a problem. He was using it sometimes. To him, it wasn't a problem. The cocaine was the problem. Okay, we'll focus on the cocaine because that's what you want to focus on. You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense? Like, it's person-centered. It's and flipping the script and not just saying, "Oh, you're a drug addict, so stop." And like,
Right.
we're gonna, it's not that simple. But what was the first half of that question? I think I kind of forgot it.
It was, is it possible to overcome it with willpower and good advice alone without expert intervention?
I think it could. I think it can be. Sure, I do. I do. I think because we're all different, unique individuals, and we all have different places where, for me, I guess the best way to describe it is where the pain is great enough. Because none of us really change anything until the pain of staying the same has gotten great enough, right? And that's just in general with anything. So let's just say that we're not like addiction is just part of anything, right? Like it's not some other thing. It's all of it. Like it's anything else in life. So it's a matter of like, you get what I'm saying? I don't know if that makes sense.
No, that does make sense. And then the question kind of after that, going back to community, is have you dealt or do you know of a community who's defeated drug addiction across the states, and how, or maybe communities that you've worked with or organize, or some of the work that you do, how did you manage to save their loved ones? Is there any advice that you can give us about raising awareness to fight drugs? And on that, I'm kind of going to loop in the other question is, how can a Palestinian or other immigrant community member who don't speak English get valuable information like this? So maybe if you have any resources.
That's a good question. And you're gonna kill me, but you're gonna have to start over with the first part of that. But
I will.
let me start off with this. What you said about the resources. I'm gonna have to look into that, to be honest with you, because I don't know as far as with the language, but that's something I'm gonna. If it's okay, I can stay in contact with you
Of course.
and look into with people that have larger networks than me, maybe in that way.
Yeah, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, I don't know how to answer that.
Okay. Yeah, I guess if you can help connect us with any resources specifically for Arabic-speaking communities, immigrant communities, that would be really helpful. And they just kind of added on. I asked this because a lot of parents don't speak English, and the language barrier don't allow them to understand or see what their children are going through. I've seen that while working in a place where juveniles from immigrant communities used to come every week because of drug issues, and parents had no idea.
Yeah, I remember Mukay, and I know her. She's the one who we're friends. Yeah, that's true, and I really need to look into that.
Yeah, that would be great. And if we could help with that and work together to give these resources out, we as a center would love to help with that also.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's so important. Now, what was the first half of that?
The first part was, have you dealt with a community who has defeated drug addiction across the states, and how, or any organizations maybe or work that you've personally done, how did you manage to save their loved ones? Is there any advice that you can give us as a community?
I mean, I've never heard of a community defeating addiction, because it's just, I mean, maybe a community that doesn't have humans, probably. I mean, I'm not trying to be, facetious, but literally, like, it's just a human thing. Like, it's really not about it. It's not about a substance or a specific behavior. That it's just a human thing. It's a human thing that people deal with when, certain obviously substances become that way. They kind of, certain substances preclude or kind of make that happen on their own. But also there's genetic components as well. That this can be passed through our genes, of course. So to ask about a community completely, no. I think as far as working with people, it's like really like, I feel myself to be like kind of a resource center in that way as a person, like what somebody might be like looking for. Like, it could be they need a methadone clinic, or they need a place to live, like a housing. Like, one of the biggest struggles people deal with, obviously, when it comes to this, is housing. And if somebody doesn't have housing, getting them to stop doing drugs is a lot harder when they don't have nowhere to live. Like, it's like, if we go back to like middle school or high school, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and our basic needs, food and shelter, are so important. If we don't have those basic foundations, it's really hard for the rest of it. And the key is, obviously, within the community, to have this awareness talk, is to address these things before they get out of control. And it really is a matter of, it's a matter of going back to what I said before, is destroying the idea in the community that it's a demonized subject, like that it's okay, it's just okay to talk about that, just as as anything else, like bullying or whatever else.
Right. Yeah. And I think part of that question was trying to get at advice, just as a community trying to work together. What can we do to help? I think to help make people feel comfortable coming and asking for that support. And part of another question I see that I think is also important is, what are the most common pain sources that lead to addiction? And maybe we can start a conversation with, how do we identify what it is that people need that cause them to get addicted instead?
Well, sure. That's so important. It does. A lot of it starts, especially if we're talking about adolescents and teenagers and stuff. It's trauma. It's bullying. It's these things that we don't think of. It's these things that, like, the way we talk to our kids, the way we reprimand them. It's those accumulative effects, and everybody reacts differently. Like, I would recommend everybody look up Dr. Gabor, and I'll spell it. It's Gabor, and his last name is Mate, Mate. He's a physician out of Vancouver, British Columbia. He's worked out of it's a safe injection site in Vancouver, where people can go to inject heroin and stuff in a safe place where they're monitored, and to keep them from overdosing. But the reason I'm not bringing that up for that place up to talk is why the reason I'm bringing him up is he talks a lot, and you could watch a lot of YouTube videos on him, tons of books that he's written about trauma being like the underlying cause of addiction. And I believe that to be pretty on point. And that's what I meant and I believe, and so that quote that I think I was quoted earlier about with the why the addiction, or why the pain, I believe that was his. So I can't take credit for it, but I'm pretty sure it was him.
It was a powerful line. I had to type it out.
Yeah, he's that's one of my favorites from him. It made me interested in listening to him. I've listened to hours upon hours of his YouTube lectures on this subject, and that's what he's talking about, is getting to the root. I'll share this whenever I go give like a talk, like to like an audience or whatever. One of the things that I always share at the end is this little allegory story. So a guy's walking through the woods, and it's a beautiful day, and it's the beautiful creek right next to him, and it's picturesque. And he looks down at the creek bed, and he sees garbage that's accumulated. And it's like, oh man, it'd be nice to take a picture, but I should clean this garbage up. So he takes the afternoon, cleans it up, makes it look nice, feels real proud, leaves, goes home, comes back the next day, wants to admire the beauty again. There's more garbage collected. He's like, let me clean it up. Goes back home, comes back next day, keeps going through this process over and over again. Finally, he thinks, you know what? I should take a little walk to see where this starts. He goes to the beginning where the creek starts, and there's a garbage dump. So the moral to the story is, we can clean up the outside as much as we want, but until we get to the root of the issue, the garbage is going to continue to accumulate. So it'll show up, and you see what I'm saying? So if we don't get to the root, maybe the heroin addiction will stop, but maybe it'll show up in addiction to sex, or it'll show up in addiction to buying Michael Jordan, the Air Jordan shoes, or it'll show into addiction to cars, or gambling or money or whatever. Like maybe until we get to the root, you know, the garbage continues to accumulate.
Right.
If that makes
Of course.
sense.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks for sharing that. Actually, yeah, and I think that's where the community comes back, right? It's, we need
Yes.
to, instead of just trying to band-aid things, right, really get to the root of where this is coming from. I see another question. I guess this is more kind of for PAC maybe, but are there any grants for the faith-based groups, so maybe not PAC, but faith-based groups to utilize to start such programs in their communities? So do you have any resources for grants?
Well, I personally don't, but I know Makeda's. I know her personally, and she's a friend. And she, I will tell you that I will reach out to you. Will reach out to her. I'll reach out to you to her and let her know of who maybe I can put her in touch with at the state, and I could also send it to you guys when I find out about the Arabic speaking resources as well.
Resources.
So
yeah,
I don't know how much help I can offer on that end because I would think there's got to be grant money out there. There's got to be for that, and if there isn't, there certainly should be.
There should be, yeah, and maybe they're a little more hidden, and we just need to put in a little more effort to find them too.
Yeah,
but I do definitely want to work on Arabic speaking hotlines, maybe, or I know that maybe we've talked about potential like written material that we can pass out, but maybe making it more accessible for people to read would be really great.
Sure, I understand, of course.
I don't see any more questions. I'm going to give a couple more minutes for folks for any last minute comments, questions, concerns. I don't know if you if you have any closing remarks or kind of last thoughts you want to share with us.
No,
or advice that you can give us.
I mean, my biggest piece of advice, I keep going back to community. I keep going back to dispelling the myth. To really, and it's, I really understand. I respect the challenge of this because this is a taboo subject. So I really respect the challenge that it takes to make it an open topic for discussion. But, I think ultimately I would think the collective belief would be community, unity, right? So
yeah.
I don't know. I see more stuff coming.
It's always easier when you have people to help you through it than
no doubt.
alone. There are some. We can keep going. There are some more questions. Have any of your patients defeated heroin? How many have survived from using heroin? In our community, we lose one life every 10 days and over 100 overdoses every day in our town. So how can you raise awareness and educate and also save our people? Or should we pack up and leave and find a better place to live? Should we look for a different community?
Well, I mean, I don't really have patients. I'm not a doctor or anything, but I mean, I survived. I've been off of heroin for 4.5 years. So awesome. I'm one, I would say. I will say the numbers of the people that make it through aren't high. They're not. It's just, the thing is, it's because of what's out there. It's because of how potent. It's not even heroin. It's fentanyl. It's carfentanil, which is even 1,000 times stronger than fentanyl. I'm not sure what the number is, but a lot stronger. And I mean, you're dead. Like you're dead, like that quick. So it's, we can't even get to it. The thing is, you can't even get to people when they've lost everything. Now they don't have the chance to lose everything. They just die the first time sometimes. So and as far as like, raising awareness is having conversations like this, and having other conversations and other roundtables and other, discussion groups on how to create events and other such things. As far as finding another place to live, I mean, I don't know if you're going to find anywhere else in the United States. You're not going to find this problem. There's not a community it doesn't touch. So maybe you'd have to move overseas. I don't know. And I'm not being, again, I don't want to sound facetious, but I'm serious. Like I don't really think there's a community this doesn't touch anywhere in the U.S. So, it's your neighbor. I promise. Do you believe neglecting the spiritual and emotional well-being of the society? Oh man, thank you for asking that. A billion, bajillion, 11 billion %. I do. Yes. Yes, I do. This is a spiritual thing. Everything's a spiritual thing. I mean, we're physical, emotional, psychological, mental, and spiritual beings. None of it is separate from our being. So the fact that the spiritual thing has kind of been like, frowned upon generally in society, and in favor of the Kardashians and fancy cars and diamond rings and money and bling and all that. Yes, I do. But I do think the hope is this. If you go to Barnes and Noble, if you having a Barnes and Noble in your town, go to Barnes and Noble and look at the spiritual books are moved to the front of the store now. There's a reason for that. The world's waking up. The world is completely waking up. So it's very inspiring. I totally see it a lot, and a lot of the work that I do. I'm a shamanic practitioner, so I'm totally seeing a lot of pretty amazing things that are happening because of the spiritual awakening that's happening. And I think that's because this year, like I said earlier in the beginning, people have been forced to sit with themselves, and you can't help but your spirit's going to be nudged in one way or another. It's going to, you're either going to surrender to it or you're going to go kicking and screaming, I think.
Definitely. There's one more question. How can we talk to our kids about drugs at home? What age do I start talking about drugs with my kids?
I think it's I don't think there's a specific number, because I think it's very specific to the kid, to their maturity, their personalities. Mm-hmm. My kids are 12 and 9. I've never actually specifically had the conversation with them yet because of what I just said, personality and, maturity levels and stuff like that. But it is a conversation that I will be having with them because, they need to know. It's not something that I hide. I mean, if you Google my name, Google my name, have fun. Like you'll see. Like they I can't hide it from them, and I wouldn't. It's irresponsible of me to do so, I think. And as far as talking to them about drugs, I think sharing things like this, getting people that if you're not familiar with the specific topic within that conversation, talk to somebody who does know. Like, educate yourself as much as possible, and from multiple sources. Don't just go to one source. Like, really kind of investigate, because you kind of want to go armed. You want to kind of know what you're talking about.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you for those answers. I don't see any more questions. If you have any last minute kind of closing remarks, I do just want to take a moment and first off, also just thank you for giving us your time and for all that you do in general and sharing resources with us. I'm sure we're going to stay in contact, and hopefully we can continue building resources also in Arabic and other accessible ways for our community.
Yeah.
So I'd love to stay in touch. If anyone that is watching online wants to kind of be more invested in this and work on this, please let me know. You can always contact our center and let us know. I want to just also remind everyone, I'm putting it on the screen, to please fill out our community needs survey. If this is something that you really want PAC to focus on more, fill out the survey and let us know. If there are other issues that are maybe difficult to talk about and you want us to be the people to create these platforms and talk about it, please take a couple minutes and fill out our survey so that we can continue supporting our community. I don't see any more questions, so I'm kind of going to just wrap us up there. Again, thank you, Stephen, for your time. Thank you, everyone, for all of your engagement, and we will see you all soon. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.